The reality is that people of color know all about people who are not of color. And people who are not of color are fundamentally too often willfully ignorant of other cultures than their own or simply uninformed.
Dave Bolger here, and welcome to Had I Known, an exploration of the Hamilton College experience. This week we talk to members of the class of 1956. Before we get to this week's show, though, I want to take a moment to thank once again our guest from last week, Jess Klein, class of 1995. I had a complete brain meltdown as I was putting the show together last week. And at the absolute last minute, as I was just about to wrap up the final edit and post the show, it dawned on me that I had spent over an hour talking to a singer-songwriter, talking about her music, and and at no point was on the show was I playing her music. And that just felt like an immense miss on my part. So I sent a very last-minute email to Jess late at night because, similar to my experience at Hamilton, when I have a deadline to meet, I wait till the last possible minute to meet that deadline. So I was editing the show up until the wee hours of the morning, and sent Jess a note asking if she would be okay if I'd play some music for her, but just didn't come together until far too late. So stick around at the end of this show, and I'm going to do what we were supposed to do last week and play a song from Jess Klein, because since I've talked to her, I've been listening to her music quite a bit, and it's been stuck in my head. So now I'm going to make sure it gets stuck in your head as well. So stick around for the end of the show, and we'll play a special live version of one of Jess's songs. If you haven't had a chance to hear that conversation yet, check it out. You can go to hadiknown.buzzsprout.com. Again, hadiknown.buzzsprout.com, where you can check out that conversation and any previous conversation we've had. And we've had quite a lot of good ones. So if you haven't listened to them, I don't know what you're waiting for. You're missing out. And you're hurting my feelings that you haven't heard them yet. And if you have heard it, I'd love to hear what you think. Hit us up on social media, Had I Known Show on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Again, Had I Known Show. Or you can drop us a line via email, hadiknownshow@gmail.com. Again, hadiknownshow@gmail.com. All right, let's get into this week's show. It's a different one, bit of a different format. Up until this point, I've only talked to a singular guest each week. But this week, we have multiple guests at once. So we're going to do things a little bit differently. I had the immense fortune to join many members of the class of 1956 in what has become an ongoing Zoom session for these guys as they ramp up towards their 65th college reunion. And in all likelihood, they won't be doing that reunion in person, so they've been getting together on Zoom to talk about things. And as I learned, as I got into this conversation, this was not just a trip down memory lane and recounting some old tales and getting together for some laughs. These men are using this forum to continue their education, to better themselves, and they are looking for ways to help make a change on the campus at Hamilton College. This is a group reckoning with their experiences back in the 1950s and putting it in perspective in today's world, what white privilege meant for them. So a little bit about the format for this week. Because this was a Zoom with 10 people, didn't always lend itself to this listening experience. So I had to edit out some bits of the conversation. So rather than just let this play, I've taken some of the highlights of the conversation, and I'll play some of the clips. I'll come back and talk about them, and I'll play some more clips. Some of the clips will be longer than others and will feel like a natural conversation, but I've tried to pull out some of the pieces. But don't get me wrong, and you'll hear this. This is not a case of guys in their mid-80s who don't know how to use Zoom and issues with being on mute, not realizing they're on mute and having to teach them how to use Zoom. Quite the opposite. In fact, this group was sharp and on point. I felt like I had to play catch up and was hanging on for dear life just to keep myself as part of the conversation. And they were sharper and on top of it as far as the technology was concerned, more so than the 20s, 30s, and 40-year-olds I work with on a daily basis. So this was more just about editing for brevity more than anything else. So first up is Greg Bathen. Greg is the class correspondent for the class of 56, and as I understand it, has played a significant role in pulling this group together and getting them engaged in these Zoom sessions. And here Greg talks a little bit about what the purpose of these sessions have been, and gives us a peek into another project they're working on. So in addition to coming on this show, they're in conversation with The Spectator about doing a special feature for them. And here he talks about that feature, and I think that the insight he gives into the plan for that feature gives you a little bit of a taste of really what their conversations and what their Zoom sessions have been all about. So take a listen to Greg talking about what they've been having going on.
I said a note which kind of explained what it was that we had hoped to do. And I said, how about an article, a dialogue between two men who have lived on different planets on that little hill 60 years ago, but who have now come to respect, and yes, we can even use the word love for each other, who are now each profoundly sorry that the years that followed were not enriched by each other's presence in their lives, and indeed by the presence of other classmates who were not, and I quote here, people like us. In those times, we went to class together, and then we strolled across the campus to different ways of living. Well, 60 years on, we each have something to say about that.
So that gives you a little bit of a taste of what's behind the conversations that this class has been having with each other. And this idea of associating at the time on campus with, quote, people like me comes up quite a bit, and I think is a common theme throughout, and a common theme for people regardless of class year. And I think we'll come back to that quite a few times through this conversation. The other thing that comes through in this conversation and some of what Greg was talking about is the idea of building new relationships, connecting with people that these guys didn't know as well during their time on the Hill, and many years later are now creating and building new friendships. And that's something that the next person we're going to hear from touches on a bit in some opening comments that he had made. Here we hear from Fletch Waller, who talks about making new friends through this process of connecting with members of his class.
Well, Dave, somebody used the term, maybe it was you, Ed, of renewing friendships. In my case, it's making friendships. I did not know many of these people that you see arrayed across the top of your screen when I was on campus in the Hill. And this has been a remarkable experience. I got to know Greg Bathen through his role as secretary, and he and I exchanged letters. We exchanged creative writing. We've exchanged all sorts of things. And I called on Greg when I was out in the Baltimore area. And the first time we'd seen each other in probably 70 years. So it's been a wonderful experience. What it's brought home to me is how isolated each of us chose to be, self-isolated, in silos of fraternities and dining clubs. The college relied on the fraternities and the clubs to provide the social life of the college, which they therefore did not have to work hard to provide and to stimulate. But it allowed us to silo and to and socially isolate within a small group of 30 or 40 people. That was a deprivation, as I now look back upon it. For I failed to make contact with a variety of people, unlike myself, and so looking at the interesting discontinuity for me in this recent interest that we've had in DEI is that I had the impression from the alumni bulletin that Hamilton student body was diverse and was highly engaged. And the alumni magazine painted this picture of wonderful, bright, capable, curious young people, much more attractive and curious and involved than was I. And then to discover from the letters of President Wapperman and the ensuing turmoil that not was all well, that this was a superficial view of the Hamilton campus, and there was a lot more going on. And that's when we began to explore and really talk about. And we haven't been telling tales and spending our time that way. We've been exchanging views of what we could do to help, how we could be part of how our view of Hamilton and our experience could give some perspective to the current students who Terry Martinez characterized as having this short 4-year span of photograph and no understanding of where the college had come from, how much change there had been, no sense of the momentum and the resistance to change that the educational institutions all suffer from. And so that's what we've been talking about. Terry Martinez was very candid with us about the activists, about the Black Latino Student Association, about the other African-American group, the critics, how sensitive they are to words and to innuendo. For example, that "Go Blue" from the athletic department just blew people out of the water because of the supposed endorsement of police. So this new sensitivity and distrust of administration is concerning to us. Some of us had wonderful relationships with the administration back in the day. So these are the things we've been talking about. We have not been just dreaming of old times. We've been more talking about remorse and regret that we weren't more aware and more thoughtful at the time, at least in my case, a great deal of regret about how little I understood what was happening.
So there you go. This is a group of men who are getting together to talk about their experiences in the 1950s and putting things into perspective through the lens of today, and thinking about white privilege, thinking about diversity and inclusion, and still thinking about what can they do, what can they learn, and how can they help the community be better. So that led me to inquire with the group about their experiences in the 1950s, to get a sense for what it was like on campus, all men, 400 students in the 1950s. And that led to first Daniel Teitelbaum, Danny, speaking up about his experiences. And because he's a Hamilton man, he's a writer, he's also a rabbi and a doctor, and on and on and on. But Danny wrote down a letter, he penned a letter about his experiences, and we gave him the opportunity to read that. And you'll hear some real deep personal experiences that were enlightening and eye-opening about what the campus was like in the 1950s. So here's Daniel Teitelbaum talking about what it was like for him at Hamilton in the 1950s.
I came to Hamilton in 1952 at the age of 17. I was a Jew from a Brooklyn public high school, a reasonably competent student. I had earned a New York State Regents Scholarship. I could read and write an English declarative sentence well enough to test out of English composition and into Professor Lindley's English literature section. I was not an athlete. I did have extraordinary credentials in science. I had been a summer fellow at Jackson Memorial Laboratory doing cancer research for the 2 summers before I came to Hamilton. I wore Brooks Brothers clothing. I had a minimal Brooklyn brogue, and I spoke politely and in a normal tone of voice. I was placed in a room in the South with 3 Jews as roommates. We were in a pod of 5 rooms, each of which had 4 Jews domiciled. We had a Jew for an RA, Bob Kreutzer. This quaint arrangement later became an issue in discussion with President McEwen. I was not invited to visit any fraternity house, and of course was not rushed by any fraternity. In fact, in the entire 4 years that I spent at Hamilton, I was never invited into a fraternity house, even for a coffee. I know that one Jew was pledged and became a brother at ELS, and I have a vague memory that someone may have been pledged by T. If that's correct, 10% of the Hamilton incoming Jewish freshmen were pledged to fraternities. For the Christian majority, probably 75 to 80% of the students were rushed and pledged. I ate in Commons for 4 years. I joined Squires Club, a social club located in a house on the hill with no eating facilities. It was separate, and in its attempt to be equal, utterly unequal. Our membership consisted of Jews, Italians, a few Greeks, a few Lebanese, and other assorted others. We were the folks left to sit on the bench in the Animal House movie. During my time at Hamilton, I really don't think I spent an hour total with all of the Christian members of this wonderful cabal of survivors. I'm not sure we could have been friends had we talked then. There was altogether too much formal separation for that. I was told to attend chapel, a Presbyterian service on Sunday nights, required at that time. In my first act of social disobedience, I refused. Over the 4 years at Hamilton, the Jewish student group, informal as no religious group was officially permitted us, changed that and other untenable limitations on the expression of our identity. We were fortunate to have an ally in the dean of the chapel, the rabbis in Utica, and the chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. The administration, the trustees, the Hamilton traditions, with the exception of Dean Tolles, who often facilitated our access to the powers that be, were our opponents. Those struggles, in today's terms, were, in our times, skirmishes with authority, and their stories for another day. As excluded as I felt from the social life at Hamilton, the sense of inclusion and fulfillment that came from the academic life was profound. In 4 years, I never encountered a faculty member who asked or cared if I were a Jew or a Martian. The doorway to any academic building, the library, to the gym, to Commons, to the bookstore, and the coffee shop, offered a threshold where the social inequities were left behind. There were none of the microaggressions that I hear are common on campus today. Learning was pristine and sacred. There was an escape from the day-to-day social reality. I survived my 4 years. I collected a superb education, a few lasting Jewish friends, some bumps and bruises, and a deep-seated resentment of the Greek system and all it stood for. I was the first student to go from Hamilton to a Jewish seminary, where I obtained a Master of Hebrew Letters degree in the dignity of rabbi, and a clear sense that while I had learned much and understood much more about being a Jew in a Christian world, I would return to my original life goal and study medicine, and so I did. So the inevitable question is, how does it happen that I sit here, an equal among equals and a friend among friends? Obviously, many years of life and growth has changed us all. Perhaps we have become Americans in the truest sense. Each of us is unique. We've had many experiences that shaped us, and we have outlived the prejudices of the class of 1956. We have, however, retained and expanded upon the true reason we went to Hamilton, of course, a great liberal education. That has served us well. I am here, I must say, because of one among us, one whom I now recognize as a brother from another mother, Greg Batham. I doubt that Greg and I exchanged 2 words at college. I could not have picked him out of a yearbook. But in the last 2 years, as he has invited, cajoled, encouraged, and fostered all the open communication among those of us who have survived to this point with humor, honesty, discretion, warmth, and above all, deep and abiding friendship. I've come to know a Hamilton I never experienced. How deeply we each have felt the pain of the years of intervening friendship we missed. He has brought me into contact with people I never knew and should have known and cherished. We have shared experiences and thoughts, and we sit here together now in a deeply compatible space. There's a Hebrew phrase that goes, how good it is and how pleasant for brothers to sit together. Greg and all of you have done that for me.
Wow, that's great. Thank you for sharing that, Danny. You know, hearing you early on in that to show my naivete, and I think probably a lot of people listening, is as you recount the story of all of your Jewish roommates in a Jewish RA, my first reaction is, wow, what are the odds?
You should say that. President said something quite like that.
And I think back to my arriving on campus. So I myself am not Jewish, but grew up in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood on Long Island, and was shocked to find out that many of my roommates and friends had never met a Jewish person until they arrived in Clinton, New York. And I think, you know, as we talk about diversity and inclusion now, the focus, rightly so, is on people of color. But to think back that your religion was a something that would prevent you from being part of this, you know, the social life at Hamilton is it's unthinkable. So thank you for sharing that.
In the 50s, just like today, white privilege is the national issue. It's also been the issue at Hamilton. In the 50s, Jews were not integrated into the white privilege system. It was only coming to fruition as we passed through the 50s. Now we're considered in the white majority, maybe because the darker element of society is discriminated against, and so they threw us in with the white majority. And this is a national problem. And it is now Danny and I are completely accepted as white and part of white privilege. White privilege is the issue in this country. It's tearing up the country. And why darker students feel discriminated against is because they feel discriminated against in society. And Hamilton is just a reflection of this, probably a more acute expression of this than society in general.
That's Gerald Rosen there, and Gerald many times throughout the conversation brought it back to the real conversation at hand about white privilege and white supremacy. But boy, that letter from Danny, I mean, that was sincere as I was reading it. My first reaction was a completely naive one in surprise that that 4 roommates would all be Jewish at Hamilton. That would be surprising in the 1990s when I was there, and certainly on a campus of 400, that certainly would have been or should have been surprising. But his roommates, his RA, his neighbors, this notion of putting all of one ethnic group or one religion together will come up a few times throughout this conversation. But to think a Jewish student on campus not be invited to join fraternities, having real social options limited because of your religious beliefs. I think in many ways that's hard for people to fathom now, but that was very much a reality back in the 1950s for people like Danny and Gerald. So if that was the Jewish student experience, what could it possibly have been like for an African American walking around at Hamilton in the 1950s? Al Prettyman was on the Zoom. Al was one of 2, as he put it, African Americans on campus during his time, and he helped shed some light on what it was like to be a student in the 1950s as an African American at Hamilton. So let's listen to Al talk about his experience.
the thing that shocked me, well, a couple of things shocked me when I got to Hamilton. One was the fact that everybody there could identify the ethnicity of everyone else. And I said, how the hell do they know that? Having come from Jim Crow Baltimore, where our school books were the school books that were used by the white students for the past 5 years, had our teachers not of their own expense purchased contemporary school books, we would have been much farther behind than we actually were. When I found Baltimore just enraging with Schaefer, the redneck mayor who paved over all the black neighborhoods to make a way for the harbor place. Anyway, coming to Hamilton was a relief because the kind of racism I had to live with in Baltimore was not there. There was a different kind of racism which I could deal with. And it was one that was cloaked by a level of civility that I appreciated. At Hamilton, I felt that I could learn what I wanted to learn, when I wanted to learn it, and go where I wanted to go, when I wanted to go. In Baltimore, I could only go to the major library 1 day a week. There were days when you could not shop downtown. There were days when you could not go to the beach. The local library was limited in its content. So being in the Hamilton Library was a kind of nirvana. And I loved being there, especially when the librarian was Mrs. Browning, who was a delight. In the fraternity house, to which I was invited in my freshman year, because Marty Sorger insisted that I accompany him to ELS. I wasn't rushed, he was. And I did attend a dinner there. And afterwards, they invited Marty to join and did not invite me. And he said, what about Prettyman? And they said, well, he laughs too loud.
What?
Marty said, if you don't invite Prettyman, I don't come. So that's how I got into ELS. One last thing. When I did enter the house in my junior year, I had come from middle dorm where I had a single room next to John Loesch and across from Marty Sorger. And on a floor below, someone who became my dear friend, that was Omar Pound. But when I came to ELS, there was a sophomore there who wanted me to be his roommate. He was from Delaware. And when he asked his parents if it was all right that I be his roommate, they said, under no circumstances can you have a black roommate. So there's all I need to say about Hamilton. I had a wonderful time. I had some bad times, but I had a wonderful time.
Al, I'm curious, you mentioned being at the library as a nirvana, and you experienced a different kind of racism of which you could handle. Yeah. I imagine if you ventured off the campus, the experience around Hamilton in that area was probably different. Is that true?
It was true to a degree. Now, let me tell you, when I walked into the barber shop for the first time, expecting to be expelled, the fellow looked at me quizzically and said, come on, I'll try it. So I went to him to have my hair cut for the rest of my college career. Who's going to refuse you at the liquor store?
It's interesting to hear Al talk about the barber shop and the curiosity of the barber in Clinton at the time, and think about the conversation that I had with Mark Cryer a few months ago, where he said that one of the most common questions he got when he was putting together his play, Everything You've Wanted to Ask an African American But Were Afraid to Ask, and how he said that the most common question he got was about African Americans' hair. That weird curiosity seems to have existed throughout time. And that's just an interesting one to me. Can you imagine someone's parents forbidding them from having a roommate because they're an African American, because of the color of their skin. And it's crazy. But this idea that the racism he dealt with at Hamilton was tolerable, and he goes so far as to say appreciated because of what he had to deal with in Jim Crow Baltimore. I mean, it's incredible. So as we dug into the experience on campus in the 1950s, one of the things I was interested to understand was what it was like as an all-male campus. So as you'll hear, I inquired with the guys about what that experience was like. As we talk about diversity and inclusion, there's also one element of that is gender. And for you all, there was no opportunity to have any kind of inclusion with women because it was an all-men's school. Can you talk a little bit about that experience, being on campus with men and you know, the good and bad, and whether or not you even thought about the fact that you know, there was half the population wasn't invited to school?
Thought about it all the time.
But it did focus you on studies. I did not have a female classmate until I was a resident in medicine. And it focuses your attention on academics.
Did anyone know anyone who was gay? There must have been
Yes.
somebody gay in that class, but I don't remember anybody.
I do.
There was somebody, in other words. Yeah.
There were several.
There was who?
Several.
Several, he said.
So several. I thought you meant my friend Everett.
You know, the issue of what's happened to Hamilton since it has become coeducational is really, to me, a mystery. I've not really understood how the transition from an all-male school to a coeducational school has gone. I understood from the dean that there are now more women than men at Hamilton, which is interesting. When I was the social chairman at Squires Club, one of my tasks was to find women willing to come to parties. And that was interesting because it meant visits to Sims dorm at Syracuse, at Casanova Junior College. And we did manage to have a social life. But we managed, you know, and I did not find myself feeling that it was a monastery so much as it was a closet. And the fact that you're sitting in a closet, Dave, just kind of is, to me, a metaphor for much of what went on. Middle dorm was a dorm of 3 floors of single rooms, each of which I think was a refuge.
A refuge meaning what?
From the general social life of the campus. Remember that many of the students were living in fraternity houses. That if you were living in South, you were probably a freshman. If you were living in Carnegie, you were probably not ethnic. But if you were in Middle, you were there for some particular reason, just because it was all single rooms. And the other dorms were mostly...
We didn't like our freshman roommates.
Well, maybe we needed to escape from them.
Lots of conversation about middle dorm, which was a new one for me. I hadn't heard that one. The best I can tell, or the best I can guess, is if there was north and south, what I knew to be Kirkland, perhaps was middle dorm. I don't know that for sure, but that's my guess there. Before I had a chance to ask a follow-up question to Danny about his very Animal House-like responsibility to find women from other institutions to come to parties, the conversation shifted quickly because Gerald chimed in and said, well, what are we going to do about white supremacy and white privilege? That's the important topic. Let's get back to that topic, and what are we going to do? And as we talked about the importance of amplifying conversations like this, Danny chimed in and referenced a conversation they had with Dean of Students Terry Martinez.
Well, when Terry spoke to us, Terry Martinez, she made a point about other, and that in each generation at the college, there has been a new other. And I think that it's important for later generations to hear, that the experience of other was similar, and that other needs active work if you're going to resolve it on campus. If you're not going to resolve it on campus, it's possible, and I think looking at us here as a group, it's possible to resolve it through life experience after that. But it doesn't just happen. It requires work. And you said something that was wonderful. You said, how could that have happened, to have all those Jewish roommates? How could that possibly be? And I've told the story here of going to President McEwen and telling him that, when I was a freshman, there were 5 rooms of 4 Jewish boys. And he said to me, how could that possibly have been? Now, did he not know? Was somebody else doing that? Or did he know, and was he not willing to own up to it? Activism, in my view, activism is very important. I have spent my life as an activist, and I'm not afraid of it. And we shouldn't be afraid of it. And the college should encourage it. But activism is different from anarchy and disruption. And one of the things that, and then I'll stop. One of the things that disturbed me enormously was this comment about microaggressions in the classroom. That was why, in my piece that I read before, I wanted to make the point that at least in our day, and for me, when I walked into the classroom, all this crap was gone. When Dr. Johnson sat us down to talk about Shakespeare, or Professor Hess was teaching biology, or anyone else was teaching Paul Parker in art, there wasn't Martians and Jews and whatever. There were just Hamiltonians, and we were going to be educated. And that's why we're here today. That, I think, gets lost in the whole mix.
Well, I think that's the idea of going to college, right? Especially a liberal arts college, is expanding your mind and learning all facets of life. And I think, but it takes an active attempt to understand the person sitting across from you, the person sharing a room with you, the person, in your classroom, the person you're eating a meal with, what their background is and where they come from, regardless of religion or color or what have you. And I think for far too long on that campus, it was too easy to just sequester yourself with people who were like you, whether you intended to or not. In your case, you didn't even intend to, and the school was doing it for you. And I think each generation has gotten a little bit better at doing that, and I think we just need to continue to push that.
One thing, and this is something I had to bring up with my faculty, and I bring it up with my students. On the syllabus, there was a phrase, something about welcoming the stranger. And I said, who is this? And to whom is it addressed, and why is it on the syllabus? I took it off mine. And I had to explain to the people who were framing this course that their assumption was an inversion of reality, that in fact, they are the stranger. And if anybody reads Isabel Wilkerson's book that Fletch has referred to on caste, they will get a glimpse of why. The reality is that people of color know all about people who are not of color. And people who are not of color are fundamentally, too often, willfully ignorant of other cultures than their own, or simply uninformed. And until people take that to heart, they're not going to really understand what's going on in the world, or in our society in particular.
Al, does it concern you that we're in an age now where it can be even easier to avoid what you're talking about? There's this notion of one tribe is only going to talk to one tribe and only going to seek out information from that tribe and shut everything else out. In the age of information, it should be easier to learn more about cultures, but it seems like we're going in the opposite direction.
It is easier, but you're going to have to want to do it. And most people don't. Too many people don't. They're very satisfied to be willfully segregated from other groups.
I'd like to speak to that briefly. I was raised by a very dominant father who was a crusader for equity and inclusion and anti-discrimination. And yet I went to Hamilton as his son, believing intellectually, but not understanding it emotionally, that I was acting out white superiority, and was blithely confident that I was a good guy and not a racist. It's just amazing to me in retrospect that with all of the preparation, intellectual preparation that he had inculcated in me, I continued to go on my merry way of, as Isabel Witherspoon talked about, of assuming centrality and assuming I was a good guy, I wasn't a racist, and I was going to go and where I was comfortable and be there. So I look back with amazement at how unconsciously I accepted this role of white superiority or the upper caste.
And I know you're not alone in that, and people are just coming to terms with that as well, if they have at all. I think
one of the reasons for that is that we have not dealt with this whole question of basic human instinct.
Right.
Segregation and discrimination speaks to people like us, which is a phrase that I first learned when I moved back to the United States. And people like us means literally people like us. That's the ones you are most comfortable with. Somehow or another, that's the problem that's got to be addressed.
I'll tell you, when I was giving a lecture at Hamilton after I had graduated in Bristol, with that curve around space, so you're on the other side, you can't see who's on the opposite side. Afterward, a student came up to me and he thought he was paying me a compliment. And he said, Mr. Ferdinand, if I hadn't seen you, I wouldn't have known that you were black.
Well, I guess that goes to, I think, Danny had brought up the point about microaggressions, and for a long time that was a big focus on changing behavior. I think that's an example of something that people deal with, and it's unconscious bias that you think is, as Fletch said, you think you're not racist, and but then you behave in ways that are offensive or demeaning to people, and you don't even realize it. We need to shine a light on that and educate.
All right.
We didn't know that then. We know it now. How do we get that across, that we learned that probably through some pain, some education, and maybe some very positive experiences with the other? That may be part of it. My early experiences in the larger world of the Christian white privilege were extraordinarily negative. The 2 summers I spent at Jackson Laboratories, I had the experience of being called a kike. I got to Hamilton, and I made the point at the beginning of my talk that I wore Brooks Brothers clothing, and I didn't particularly speak with the Brooklyn accent, I thought I'd pass. But boy, did I not pass. I mean, it was really astonishing. My roommates were, one was Lou DeZara, whom perhaps you remember, who had a Jewish mother and an Italian father, but who identified himself as a Jew, but certainly didn't have a Jewish name. And Dick Plotka, who was from Polish Jewish kid from Utica, who also didn't have a Jewish name. And lo and behold, the four of us were all identified. How did that happen? It's much more sophisticated than Dave, than your original question. It was micromanaged. Somebody was sitting there sorting pictures and students and putting things together. Does that still happen?
Yes.
From the discussion that we had about houses off campus for Black students and houses for Hispanic students, somebody's still doing that. And
Al, you're saying yes to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a clear quota for African-American students. I mean African-American students, American Black students. It hasn't changed in 30 years.
There's a quota, you're saying, to.
Oh yeah, and it's shared by other colleges and universities, and it still hovers around, in most instances, around 5%, 6%. Seldom more than that.
And so you're saying hit that 5% and then we're good, stop, and then move on.
Oh no. You then bury that within foreign students, so that you can say we have a large admission of people of color. Our people of color admissions this year is up by 20%, which is gives a false impression to me.
Right.
Al, I have to ask: are you saying that there is a policy at Hamilton today for limiting African American?
I can't assume anything other than that when I see that the percentage of African American students remains roughly the same over many, 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 many years.
Boy, I just find that such a shocking idea that exists that way. I'm just astonished.
They are not alone.
Al, what is the percentage?
It's around 5%.
Just 5.
Plus or minus.
Well, we know that at Hamilton, they said that people of color are something like 30%.
Yeah.
But a very small percentage of those are Black.
Yeah, it's the international students that drive that number up for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So there you are. Somebody is sorting. So there is a micro sort being done somewhere. Is it in the admissions office? Is it unconscious? I find it hard.
Not unconscious.
Yeah, that's what I would say. I would find, as it was not unconscious in our day, it's not unconscious now. That's something we have to say to the students now, and it's certainly something we have to say to the faculty and those who are making those decisions.
At my college, it's the result of an understanding with the board and the administration.
And an understanding of what? So with the board, I mean,
limiting admissions.
To what end? Why limit?
They don't want Black students there in any numbers. And the president says ridiculous things like, the only reason we can't get Black students to come here is because we don't have a football team.
Oh, Jesus.
Well, it's funny because it's funny because when I went to President McEwen with a proposal from one of the Jewish fraternities who were willing to set up a chapter and buy a house and put money into Hamilton, do you know what he said to me? He said, "Oh, we can't do that because people would say Hamilton was a good place for a Jewish boy to go to school." So you're telling me that it ain't changed much, has it?
No, I don't think so.
Well, so we have a lot to say, don't we?
Boy, some powerful conversation there. You know, I want to believe in my heart of hearts that there is no conscious decision to limit the amount of African Americans that are attending Hamilton. And I know if you were to talk to the administration, they would ensure you that that wasn't the case. But, you know, when Al points to the numbers and those numbers don't change, there's clearly still an issue at hand. And I know that that's something that the school is wrestling with. And if you think about the notion and that bit there about the other and how every generation, every group has another and match that to this notion of human nature wanting to associate with people like me, and as Al says, an unwillingness to learn to break down those barriers. I mean, that in many ways is the core of what ails us in this country and what has ailed us for far too long. And I think amplifying that conversation and hearing people in the 50s who dealt with this puts things in perspective to the things we're dealing with today. Which led me to the next question, which was, what do these men from the class of 1956 have to say? What message do they have for students today?
But advice to the students today, for God's sake, mix. Don't isolate yourself in silos.
Right.
You have the chance of a lifetime. You will never find a less threatening environment than you're in now to get to know somebody completely unlike you. Don't waste it. You'll find out if you do that, if you do mix, you will wind up with some phenomenally dear and loyal lifetime friends. And if you don't do it, you will have wasted your time getting a college education.
It's a great
and
point.
I agree, Al, but I'd like to add mix with faculty as well.
Yes.
Someone talked about what's our message to students. I'm more interested in what our message is to faculty and to the administration.
Please.
It takes a concerted effort of education, of courses, of self-examination to break down this upper class assumption of centrality. At my institution where I'm working on this, we've worked for 7 years. We have every trustee has gone through 3 hours or more of race sensitivity training. We have had courses on microaggression. All of the staff from the switchboard operator up have been through these courses. We use outside consultants. We've worked for 7 years on this and are still working. And we have a board that's 40% minority people of color, of which African Americans are admittedly underrepresented slightly. We have staff as 50%, with African Americans, with American blacks quite prominent. So we make progress, but the progress comes from concerted study and examination under professionals and looking at ourselves and discovering. The great insight for me was when I went from my head to my emotions about recognizing white superiority and white upper class privilege. This doesn't just happen. And the faculty and the administration have got to enforce this and got to push courses on white superiority and on caste. This ought to be a regular part of the curriculum.
If you listen to my conversation with Josie Collier, the president of the Alumni Association, you heard her talk about how she is on a path to really create change, positive change within the Hamilton community. And I have to imagine she's thrilled to know that there are people like Fletch Waller, who you heard speak there, pushing for change as well, pushing for positive change. And then the message there from Al Prettyman about telling students to mix with each other, to not stay within those silos. That is a theme that comes up whether we've talked to students from the 2000s, from the 90s, from the 80s, all the way back to the 50s. A common regret is having not expanded your social groups and gotten to know and interacted with more people. And I think if people are willing to do that, you naturally will learn more about people, which hopefully will break down some silos and make some positive change in terms of how we think about diversity inclusion, not only within the Hamilton community, but then when those students go out into the world and can make a change within the world. And then finally, I asked this group the same question I ask all my guests, which is there anything you wish you had known?
I wish I had known that I was reasonably competent. I went to school as a 17-year-old. lacking confidence, generally escaping from responsibility. I just look back with horror what the opportunities that I missed by choice, opportunities I chose not to take advantage of. It wasn't until graduate school when I learned that I could speak on my feet as effectively as men 4 and 5 and 6 years my senior in experience in this armed services and so on. And I could speak on my feet better than most of my same age and contemporaries who came directly out of undergraduate study. I didn't learn till graduate school that I was competent at expressing myself in the written word. I wish I had known and had confidence back at Hamilton when I had those opportunities that I chose to avoid because I doubted my competence. And then in industry, there was further reinforcement. So that's what I wish I had known. I wish I had known I could push myself on others and on faculty.
I would say I took advantage of the academics, but I didn't belong there. And I came to Hamilton because I won a New York State Regents Scholarship, and my stepmother said, you don't give that up because it was essentially a free ride. I really wanted to go to Swarthmore, and I don't know how different my life might have been had I gone there, because there I would not have been other. The education might have been quite similar, but I would not have been other. I think I learned a great deal by being other, and I am a more comfortable person in my own skin because of that experience.
Do you think you're more of an activist because of it? You mentioned
I was an activist. I was born an activist. I was probably hollering at people when I walked out. No, truthfully. But I think that's not the issue. The issue is that I might have been more comfortable in my own skin had I recognized that I was other. And it didn't make any difference that I wore Brooks Brothers clothing.
I'm going to cut this short. The one thing that I regret not knowing when I was at Hamilton was I didn't know that Tiger Tom Tileston, who taught French from his awful mimeograph textbook, taught golf. I didn't learn that until my last year. Had I known that, I would have taken golf lessons with him all 4 years.
All right, so there you have it. There's a small sample of the conversation I had with 9 members of the class of 1956. As I said to them, I can only hope that I look and sound as good and am as sharp as these gentlemen are when I'm in my mid-80s. I hope it's a sign that there is some sort of fountain of youth feeding the water in Clinton, New York, because it certainly seems like these guys found it when they were there. Important lessons to be learned. It's a group that's constantly trying to better themselves and better their community, and I think we can all learn from that. So I hope you took something away from this conversation. I know I did. So my thanks to David Smalley, Fletch Waller, Edward Bradley, Gerald Rosen, Danny Teitelbaum, Bill Benson, Melvin Roche, Greg Bathen, and Al Prettyman. It was truly an honor to talk to them. You have been listening to Had I Known on WHCL-FM, Clinton, New York. WHCL.org, hadiknown.buzzsprout.com, Had I Known Show on social media. As always, my thanks to Dr. Michael Woods for supplying the music on this show. However, Doc is not going to play us out. As I mentioned at the open, we're going to end with a song that we should have ended last week with. And that is a live version of Soda Water by Jess Klein, last week's guest. So stick around, enjoy this great rendition of a song that I've been singing over and over again for the better part of a week, and enjoy it. Hope you enjoyed the show. We'll talk to you next week. And here's Jess Klein with Soda Water.
auburn hair, idle taxi, Leicester Square, like a lion in black, sends up the windows and lean on back. Honey's dripping from the trees, order me a soda water. Rifle swinging at my knees, order me a soda water. Said my cat, Celanese, sits on a cove on a beach where a girl can move slow in a pace she wants to know. So I showed him my card. He was stunned by the scars, and he said, that ain't right. Come on now, baby, I'll hold you tight. Honey's dripping from the trees, order me a soda water. Rifle swinging at my knees, order me a soda water. A quick, we all know. But this room, late at night, is where I'm keeping my candle bright. And I weave up these lines, green and thick, rotted vines. Out the window, they all grow, and oil slick in the grass below. Where I run, not a care, oiled leaves in my hair, till I tense like a wren and worry back on his kisses again. Honey's dripping from the trees, order me a soda water. Baseball bat swinging at my knees, order me a soda water. Honey's dripping from the trees, order me a soda water. Rifle swinging at my knees, order me a soda water. Order me a soda water. Order me a soda water. Thank you.
Had I Known podcast show on your radio or take it to go.